You wake each morning believing you still lead the room, unaware that the chairs have shifted overnight, angled subtly away from your voice. Power does not leave suddenly. It loosens its grip while you are distracted by rituals that once guaranteed obedience. You speak confidently, but confidence now echoes instead of landing, bouncing off walls already claimed by quieter forces. The silence feels respectful until you realize it is no longer listening. You remember when attention followed your movements, tracking every gesture like gravity itself depended on you. Now gravity has changed direction, pulling weight toward hands that never announce themselves. You mistake calm for loyalty, mistaking steady faces for commitment. Commitment has been replaced by convenience, and convenience asks fewer questions. You notice agreements arriving, prewritten their language, smooth their conclusions already decided. Signing feels ceremonial now, a habit maintained long after authority has expired. You reassure yourself this is cooperation, not surrender. Cooperation once meant shared purpose. Now it means shared dependence. Dependence grows quietly like vines, climbing marble beautiful until the stone can no longer breathe. You feel heavier each year, not from strength, but from obligations stacked carefully on your shoulders. Others offer relief with gentle smiles, promising efficiency, promising stability. Stability sounds comforting when exhaustion sets in. You allow others to carry small burdens for you, grateful for the help. Help has conditions, though no one says them aloud. You sense the balance shifting, but the shift feels gradual, almost humane. That is how control begins to slip without resistance. You start noticing how often invitations arrive late after plans are already set, as if your presence is a courtesy, not a requirement. Courtesy feels warm until you see it used like a lid, gently covering anything that might smell like fear. You tell yourself this is normal, that mature power shares the stage. But the stage lights no longer follow you. They soften, drift, and settle on someone standing quietly in the wings. In the wings, they never sweat, never overpromise, never explain. They simply show up with steadier hands and longer patience. Patience becomes a weapon when you are the one running out of breath. You feel your breath shorten every time you must borrow time. Borrow attention, borrow calm. Borrowing starts small, like asking for a glass of water. Then it becomes the ocean, and you pretend you are still the shore. You begin to hear new phrases repeated in the room, soft as silk, sharp as wire. The phrases are about partnership, about balance, about shared responsibility. Shared responsibility sounds fair until you notice who carries the weight when things go wrong. When wrong arrives, it points at you first. You accept the pointing because you still believe the room is yours to manage. Managing becomes your identity, even as the tools are quietly taken from your hands. You reach for them and find smooth air. Smooth air does not resist, does not argue, does not return anything. You smile anyway, practicing composure like a prayer. Behind your smile, you feel the first cold edge of replacement. You begin to notice how meetings shorten when you speak as if time itself is being rationed against your presence. Others glance at clocks less often because their schedules no longer orbit you. Orbit once meant gravity. Now it means delay. Delay is treated like a flaw that must be engineered away. You are gently engineered around. Around becomes behind without anyone saying so. You still receive summaries carefully, edited, polished, incomplete. Incomplete information feels respectful until you realize it cannot be acted upon. Action has migrated to rooms you are told about afterward. Afterward is where you now live. You tell yourself influence does not require proximity, but distance dulls authority the way fog dulls headlights. You strain forward, squinting for shapes that used to be clear. Shapes blur into intentions you cannot read. Reading once kept you ahead. Now you are always interpreting yesterday. Yesterday feels safe, familiar, irrelevant. Relevance has a short half-life in rooms obsessed with speed. Speed rewards those who arrive early and leave quietly. You arrive loudly and leave late. You begin to notice how praise replaces permission. Warm words offered where authority once stood. Praise feels lighter than control, easier to accept, harder to refuse. You accept it unaware it costs nothing to give. Those who praise you no longer wait for your answer. Answers arrive already framed, already agreed upon elsewhere. You are invited to endorse conclusions, not shape them. Endorsement feels close enough to power when power feels distant. Distance stretches subtly, like elastic, never snapping, never relaxing. You sense tension, but cannot locate its source. The room remains polite, immaculate calm. Calm is the most effective disguise. Beneath it, momentum accelerates. You try to slow it with caution reminders history. History sounds sentimental when speed becomes the only virtue. Virtue shifts without ceremony. You notice words changing meaning while keeping their shape. Familiar language now carries unfamiliar weight. You speak and hear echoes shaped like agreement. Agreement arrives instantly, suspiciously smooth. Smoothness is how friction disappears before something breaks. You start realizing how often decisions are framed as inevitable, as if choice itself has become inefficient. Inevitability sounds comforting when responsibility feels heavy. Heavy things are easier to surrender than to carry. You surrender small choices first, telling yourself they never mattered. Nothing important is lost all at once. It leaves in layers politely with receipts. Receipts document consent better than memory. Memory grows unreliable when outcomes are already locked. You hear phrases about alignment, about long-term vision. Vision belongs to those already looking past you. You are asked to trust the process. Trust replaces verification. Verification once kept you awake at night. Now sleep comes easier, and that worries you. You mistake relief for safety. Safety becomes dependence when vigilance fades. Dependence asks for patience, then silence. Silence arrives, wrapped in politeness. You nod more than you speak. Each nod feels like a door quietly closing. You notice how often urgency is discouraged, framed as instability rather than awareness. Awareness makes others uncomfortable when it interrupts their momentum. Momentum now belongs to systems that move without asking. You are advised to stay predictable. Predictability once reassured allies. Now it reassures replacements. Replacements do not rush. They wait until certainty hardens. Certainty is manufactured through repetition. Repetition dulls alarm the way waves dull stone. You hear the same assurances delivered by different mouths. Different mouths, identical tone. Tone matters more than content now. Content is adjustable. Tone must remain calm. Calm becomes mandatory. Mandatory calm suppresses instinct. Instinct once warned you before danger arrived. Now, danger wears courtesy and speaks softly. Soft voices request patience. Patience stretches until it snaps invisibly. When it snaps, nothing breaks loudly. It simply stops holding. You notice how responsibility is redistributed, while accountability remains parked squarely in front of you. Others guide the wheel, but you are asked to answer for the direction. Answering becomes ritual, not influence. Rituals comfort those who already moved on. You sense hands on the structure, reinforcing it while quietly changing its shape. The shape still looks familiar from a distance. Distance protects the illusion. Up-close joints have been replaced, beams rerouted, exits relabeled. You search for the old map. The map has been updated without your signature. Updates arrive as improvements. Improvements rarely ask permission. You are told resistance would create instability. Instability is blamed for failures that have not yet happened. Fear of hypothetical collapse becomes a leash. You feel it tighten when you question timing. Timing belongs to those who control pace. Pace has quickened beyond your stride. You walk faster, hoping to catch it. The ground moves faster still. You begin to feel managed rather than followed, guided gently away from sharp edges you once handled yourself. Guidance sounds generous until you realize it limits where you can step. Your steps become narrower, more cautious, more rehearsed. Rehearsal replaces judgment. Judgment requires risk, and risk is now discouraged. You are praised for consistency, not courage. Courage would slow the system. The system cannot slow. It feeds on continuity, not conviction. Conviction has become inconvenient. You feel it when your objections are translated into suggestions. Suggestions dissolve easily. Dissolving feels peaceful at first. Peace arrives when edges are sanded down. You become smoother, quieter, easier to route around. Others thank you for your flexibility. Flexibility bends until it forgets its original shape. You forget when you last stood firm without apology. Apology now precedes every sentence. That is how presence turns into permission. You begin to notice how your presence is requested only to legitimize outcomes already secured. Legitimacy feels important until you realize it no longer requires your judgment. Judgment has been outsourced to processes you did not design. Designed systems rarely need witnesses, only signatures. You provide the signature. Providing feels active even when choice has vanished. Vanished things leave outlines, and you mistake outlines for substance. Substance now lives elsewhere. Elsewhere is always described as efficient. Efficiency has no memory. Memory once anchored your authority. Authority fades when history becomes optional. Optional histories are edited for convenience. Convenience selects what survives. You watch your past, summarized into bullet points. Bullet points leave no room for dissent. Dissent would slow momentum. Momentum is sacred now. Sacred things do not invite debate. You fall silent before the altar of speed. You begin to realize speed is no longer a tool, but a test you are failing without knowing the rules. The rules change quietly, always just after you learn the last version. Learning becomes chasing. Chasing consumes energy meant for direction. Direction is now provided to you. Provided directions rarely include alternatives. Alternatives invite comparison. Comparison invites hesitation. Hesitation is framed as weakness. Weakness is managed with assistance. Assistance arrives prepackaged, labeled support. Support feels generous when fatigue is constant. Constant fatigue blurs the line between help and control. Control wears kindness like a uniform. The uniform is clean, pressed, unquestioned. You trust uniforms. Trust shortens conversations. Short conversations limit resistance. Limited resistance appears cooperative. Cooperation seals the transition without noise. You begin to notice how language softens consequences, turning loss into adjustment, retreat into recalibration. Recalibration suggests precision, not surrender. Precision feels respectable, scientific, beyond emotion. Emotion is treated as noise. Noise is filtered out. You feel yourself being filtered. What remains is quieter, easier to integrate. Integration replaces leadership. Leaders once shaped outcomes. Integrated pieces simply fit. Fitting requires flexibility, not force. Force is now considered outdated. Outdated things are archived. Archives are visited ceremonially, not consulted. You are praised as legacy. Legacy sounds permanent until it stops evolving. Evolution happens elsewhere. Elsewhere is described as forward-looking. Forward-looking rooms have no mirrors. Without mirrors, you fade unnoticed. You begin to sense that absence is easier to manage than opposition, and you are becoming very easy to manage. Meetings proceed smoothly when you are not required to decide anything meaningful. Meaning drains away without confrontation. Confrontation would require friction, and friction is inefficient. Inefficiency is quietly punished. Punishment arrives disguised as optimization. Optimization trims excess. Excess now includes hesitation, memory, and doubt. Doubt once protected you from bad faith. Now, doubt is treated like corrosion. Corrosion is scrubbed clean. Clean surfaces reflect nothing. Without reflection, orientation is lost. You drift where the current allows. Allowance feels generous when resistance is exhausting. Exhaustion rewrites values. Values shrink to survival. Survival favors quiet adaptation. Adaptation looks wise from the outside. Inside, it feels like erasure. You realize erasure is polite now, arriving without force, without drama, without anyone raising their voice. Silence becomes the preferred method. Silence leaves no evidence. Without evidence, nothing can be challenged. You search for the moment resistance could have mattered. The moment has been rescheduled repeatedly. Repeated delays dissolve urgency. Urgency once signaled danger. Now danger is framed as impatience. Impatience is corrected. Correction feels instructional, not punitive. Instruction implies care. Care makes compliance feel moral. Morality becomes procedural. Procedures replace conscience. Conscience asks uncomfortable questions. Questions interrupt flow. Flow is protected above all else. You stop asking. That is when disappearance completes itself. You start to understand that nothing was taken suddenly. It was reassigned, relabeled, and patiently walked away from you. Ownership dissolves when responsibility is shared too widely. Widely shared things belong to no one. No one feels guilty when outcomes sour. Guilt requires proximity. Proximity has been replaced by layers. Layers create safety for those above them. You are below most layers now. Below, the air is thinner. Thin air makes clarity feel like panic. Panic is treated with calming language. Calm language reduces urgency. Reduced urgency delays action. Delayed action becomes policy. Policy moves slower than consequence. Consequence arrives first. It waits quietly for acknowledgement. Acknowledgement never comes. Instead, another layer is added. The weight becomes invisible but heavier. You finally see how collapse can feel orderly, managed by committees, softened by language, and scheduled so far ahead it no longer feels urgent. Order disguises decay. Decay works best when it feels intentional. Intentional decay is called transition. Transition sounds temporary. Temporary states become permanent when no one marks the end. Endings require acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would force responsibility. Responsibility would point upward. Upward attention is discouraged. Instead, focus is directed sideways. Sideways focus diffuses blame. Diffused blame disappears. Disappearance is mistaken for stability. Stability becomes the headline. Headlines soothe. Soothing delays reckoning. Reckoning is reframed as pessimism. Pessimism is isolated. You learn to speak carefully. You understand at last that dominance did not fall. It was gently set down piece by piece until no one remembered lifting it. Memory fades faster when comfort is maintained. Comfort becomes the priority. Priorities decide outcomes long before decisions are announced. Announcements arrive after reality has moved on. You nod because resistance feels out of sequence. Sequence matters more than truth. Truth disrupts flow. Flow has become the highest virtue. Virtue replaces strength. Strength once required friction. Friction is now considered failure. Failure is hidden, not corrected. Hidden failures accumulate quietly. Quiet accumulation feels stable. Stability is celebrated. Celebration seals the story. The story no longer needs you. You remain present only as reference. That is how an empire leaves without leaving.